So when are you leaving anyway? The answer is it depends. Hi, I'm Nika Waters and welcome to the Boat Galley podcast. Today I'm talking about how we decide what projects need to be done before we actually shove off from the dock. This episode of the Boat Galley podcast is sponsored by Quahog Bay Bedding, offering custom bedding for your boat-shaped mattress. Make making the bed on board easy and fast with cinch fit bedding, coordinated with blankets and toppers. Sleeping on board has never been more comfy or as easy. Visit quahogbaybedding.com. That's QUAHOGBAY bedding.com and use coupon code podcast for free shipping through July 2019. So people do ask us all the time. They say, so when are you leaving? And the answer is when we're ready. Now that may contrast to what you've heard me say and you hear other people say, which is set a date. And yeah, we kind of have a date set. But when we say to somebody, we're going to leave when we're ready, it's a totally unsatisfying answer. And it's kind of unsatisfying not only to the person asking the question, but sometimes it can feel that way to us. I wish we could just say, yep, we're setting a date. We're going to leave on the 1st of July, 2020 or something like that. And that's not a bad way to go. But the thing is, we have some parameters. And I have to tell you, the big difference is that being ready isn't the same as done. We've owned this boat since 1992, and we know darn well, having owned it for 25 years, that it'll never be done. And so if somebody says when it's done, that's probably a big cue to think maybe they're not actually going to wind up getting off the dock. When we first bought Calypso, she was basically a blank canvas. And actually, that was one of the things we wanted about her. We wanted to redo the interior of a Bristol channel cutter, but we didn't really want to have to rip out what was beautiful and perfect and pristine. When we got our boat, there were some settees, there was a nav station, there was a skeleton of a galley, but the previous owner had already gotten rid of the diesel stove. There was a nice big hole through the deck where the chimney used to be. But we knew we wanted to move aboard as soon as possible, and that priority list was sorted out pretty quickly. We needed a bed, we needed a galley, and the plumbing, even for the head, that could happen a little bit later on. Wait, what? Yes. Absolutely. We were starting out our life on board at a dock, and we knew we were going to be there for a couple of years while we were working and saving money. Doing dishes in the cockpit or on the dock, it wasn't ideal. It wasn't spectacular, but we were living in Houston. It wasn't a big deal. It was totally possible. And I think we actually wound up finishing the plumbing because actually installing the plumbing and installing a head, that was on our non-negotiable list of this has to be finished before we can leave the dock. We installed the head with the boat in the water, maybe about 2 weeks before we left. If you've got a new boat, you probably have a project list. And yes, even if your boat is brand spanking new, you're going to have a project list. I promise you. I wish I could tell you otherwise, but no, you will still have a project list. But how do you organize that project list? How do you get to the point that you can say when I'm ready and understand what that means as opposed to when it's done? So step one is to brainstorm everything you need to do. Brainstorm everything you want to do too, because want and need are not always the same thing. And then you start organizing. And yes, there are lots and lots of different ways to organize this, but I will say that it is my strong belief and opinion that projects that have to do with safety absolutely need to be at the top of the list. Below the waterline safety comes ahead of above the waterline safety because holes in the bottom of the boat, if you're in the water, they can sink you, meaning that everything else that you're worried about actually doesn't matter anymore. So check your through hulls, and then you're going to check the rigging. You're going to check all your safety equipment, things like flares, life jackets, sound signals, radio, EPIRB. I will say that for me, the electrical and the charging system, particularly if you're talking about plugging into a shore power system, or if you've got an older boat in particular, that's definitely on the safety list, and so is an anchoring system. Unless you're planning on just going from dock to dock, But even then, there might be times what happens if you're caught out and you can't get in and you need to immediately stop yourself. An anchoring system is totally key in that conversation about safety. And then what comes next in the order of operations? My favorite answer to everything boating related, which is it depends. Have you figured out by now that most questions about cruising can be answered with it depends? But what comes next in this order of operations depends on you, and it depends on things like time and money and yeah, the things that matter to you. On that list might be, and this is in no particular order, things like comfort. To me, a good mattress, nice comfortable bedding for sleeping on, ventilation, fans or heat down below depending on where you are, fixing leaks, making sure you have good interior lighting for reading in bed. You might want mosquito or bug netting for the cockpit. Hygiene is probably on that list somewhere. You want to take a look at water tankage. You want to take a look at whether the water tankage is adequate and whether it's clean, whether it is plumbed the right way to get to the faucet so you can access it. Do you have a shower? What are you going to do for a shower? What about the head? There's a whole conversation to be had about what kind of head. Do you do a composting head? Do you do a regular head with a holding tank? Whatever. Food or sustenance, I think for me, when I'm talking about going on distant cruising, yeah, I'm going to need a way to carry food with me and prepare it. You're going to decide on your stove and your refrigeration. You have to think about the electrical draw for any appliances and make sure that your charging capacity and batteries can handle what you want it to do. Then another term is the environment, which is a kind of a bizarre term and very nebulous and very all-encompassing, which includes things to me like refreshing the paint down below or redoing the varnish, making sure that you're happy with the colors of the cushions and throw pillows. This is kind of like that interior design part. To me, it means having cookware and towels and clothing that you love. Yes, there's a whole conversation going on right now about Marie Kondo and the sparking joy with everything you have. But to me, that matters on a boat because whatever size boat you have, you don't have as much space as you did in a house or an apartment. It means choosing the right artwork for the walls, maybe adding a set of speakers for music or figuring out how you're going to have music or podcast or some kind of sound system. And maybe that's not important to you. Maybe you're going to bring a guitar and play everything you have, or maybe you have a harmonica. You might want comfortable cockpit cushions and a table for eating outside. Maybe there's a cockpit light that makes you smile. There are endless versions of how to make a grid of projects. Don Casey, in his book, This Old Boat, which I highly recommend if you have an older boat, because he makes it seem possible. All these projects that you have to do, he really talks about, he breaks it down into sort of the basics, and it makes it easy to see how possible it is to do them. And conversely, it also makes it easy to say, that's really not for me. I'm not capable of that, so I need to ask somebody else to do it. But he talks about making a grid of projects that involves things like safety, time, and money. And he does a 1, 2, 3 rating, and so it comes across as a grid. And a 1 means it absolutely has to be done. So if that's on a safety thing, or it might be the cheapest, or it takes the least amount of time. And then he goes through his whole project list. I like the idea because he also spends some time talking about how you tackle those. And he'll say, okay, so if replacing every single one of the through hulls is on the 1 list and you know it has to be done, but you only have a half an hour and you want to replace 3 of the interior lights with new LED things, and you only have a half an hour down at the boat, but you have those LED bulbs, you can get that project ticked off, even though it's not as important as the through hull one. But if all you have is that amount of time, then you can do something, which I kind of like. I mean, I love his idea. We tried to do it, and we've tried to do it a couple of times, but we haven't implemented it, mostly because we tend to spend time just working on the projects instead of figuring out how to organize them all. We make our list. We spend a lot of time in the thinking chair thinking about what's critical, and then we just get to work. So to come back to that question, when are we planning to leave? Well, yeah, when we're ready. But okay, what does that mean? I can tell you the things that have to get done. We have 3 big projects that must be done before we leave. We have to get the bunk done because we have to have a place to sleep. We have to get the galley done because we got to have a place to cook. And we have to get the windlass installed and the new anchor put on the bow. because we took the old windlass off, we bought a new windlass, we have a new anchor. And yes, we have an anchor on the boat, but I have to tell you, hauling up all chain by hand gets old really fast. And we have the windlass. We're going to get it all installed before we go. And the other projects, and I can tell you that list is long, they might get done before we leave, or they might get done down the road. Or we might decide that we don't need to do them at all. But the important thing is that we will get off the dock, and we have identified what projects absolutely must be done before we leave, and then we'll see you out there. Thanks for listening. If you like the show, please be sure to subscribe in your podcast app. Just search for the Boat Galley Podcast, and reviews are always appreciated. Until next time, then.